rest of his life because his parents named him Ibrahim Aadan. I want to turn to him. I mentioned the gentleman that I talked about earlier because Ibrahim, you actually look quite like him, with the same intellect. And we're going to get to the two women quite early. I've been at so many dinners where the men take up all the time, and then we get to dessert, and then women speak up, and all of a sudden we realize, oh gosh, that's what we really should have been talking about. So we'll give you an opportunity. But at this point, Ibrahim, if you would share with us your insight along the same lines of how Dr. Goudin addressed the question.
Thank you. On behalf of the Ogaden National Liberation Front, ONLF, I'm greatly honored and delighted to be part of this panel presenting the Somali people in Ogaden region. I would like to thank the organizers of this outstanding panel, and foremost, my special gratitude to former Congressman Jim Moran, who moderating this panel. Before I share the ONLF views regarding the causes of the Ethiopian conflict, I would like to briefly shed some light on the Ethiopian history to better understand how Ethiopia was initially formed and the culture of the consecutive Ethiopian governments. Ethiopia was an empire state that was forcefully formed by one nation, namely the Amhara, conquering by force or by support of the other nations. The Amhara nation dominated the Ethiopia for almost a century, and liberation wars and international strife never stopped. The Amhara domination started to weaken after the World War II due to some factors. One of the main factors was the extremely autocratic, unjust system that favored a few and marginalized the rest, created discontent after the idea of self-determination, and the wind of liberation swept the world, especially Africa. Some nations like Somalia, Eritrea, and Oromos sought independence. For example, Somalis who had their brethren across borders managing better than they started demanding more rights, and after their grievances were not addressed, started liberation wars that had domino effect in influencing the Eritreans and Oromos, and later the Tigrayans. After Mengistu and his Dergi army junta were finally defeated by Eritrea and TPLF and other liberation forces, TPLF and the Tigrayans replaced the Amhara dominant nation. TPLF initially drew a charter and promised a fundamental change that allowed all nations to exercise their self-determinations up to secession. This moral shift gave hope to all nations, and for the first year, there was optimism and hope. First, it created an exclusive alliance of four parties. The other remaining parties that it felt would threat to its power and domination was systematically sidelined, and the major ones that TPLF felt will threat were eliminated one by one after they consolidated the power. In addition, many Amhara intellectuals with ties to previous regimes and strong parties were eliminated through targeting, killing, and arbitrary detentions. The OLF was targeted and eliminated. Finally, ONLF, the Ogaden National Liberation Front, which won the election in the Somali state and was not submissive to the TPLF, was eliminated. While performing all these undemocratic practices, TPLF rhetoric was very democratic and progress, and it duped the international community and many citizens. It even went further and propagated one of the most liberal and democratic constitutions, including human rights, provisioning democratic rights, and rights of nations to self-determination. But that was only on paper, not on practical. That is the key point. I mean, TPLF put the most liberal constitutions, well written, but it was only on paper. It has never been a practical. It was just a fiction, in other words. So coming back to the issues that aggravated the situation in Ethiopia and the ONLF views, the culture of the violence to resolve differences, both at state level, people level, and other stakeholders, the attitude that the government owns the people, I mean, this has become an issue for Ethiopian people. I mean, the government has the attitude of owning the people instead of people owning the government. This is where democratic world says a government elected by the people for the people. But in other words, Ethiopia, it's a government elected by the government for the government. The idea that some are more superior than others, that they are the guardians of Ethiopia and are responsible for its unity and sovereignty, and the rest are just bandages, that they patronize and discourse of how to build a shared future and inclusive nations. The perception that says the ills of Ethiopia started with the nations-based federal system, and if that's eliminated, that Ethiopia will be united, stable, and peaceful is not true. The Ethiopian constitutions and the current federal system are not the major causes of the permanent conflict in Ethiopia. It is the nature of the whole system of Ethiopia state, where the rule of law is a fiction, not functional. Human rights are only available for the ruling elites. National resources, businesses, and government positions are exclusively reserved for the main ruling nation, and the leftovers are for the stooge allies. Not a genuine allies are possible. So, in summary, Ethiopia have never truly practiced democracy, an independent judiciary allowing for the rule of law to prevail. While the current government has taken steps to start down the path for realizing a democratic society, this journey is far from over. Democracy and rule of law have not filtered down to the regional states. This means while some major national level reforms have been taken place, the people at the regional, district, and village levels are not experiencing the democracy and are still subject to gross violations of human and civil rights. The absence of justice always results in conflict. The ONLF, as an independent political party representing the vast majority of Somali in Ethiopia, which occupy the second largest landmass and are the third largest ethnic group in terms of population, believes that a national level dialogue with all stakeholders present is critical at this time to ensure the legitimacy of the upcoming election in June and chart a way forward to jointly strengthen and establish, when necessary, the institutions that sustain a functioning democracy and rule of law. It is this absence of a national stakeholders dialogue approach that fuels conflict and tension, which severely impact marginalized communities like the Somalis. With those few remarks, I turn the mic to yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Aadan. I think I should call you doctor, because with that kind of articulation and thoughtfulness, you must have some kind of advanced degree, I'm sure. But I appreciate all that preparation and insight that you put into your statement. It was comprehensive. It covered a lot of the issues that we want to subsequently cover, as was Dr. Godinez. So I'd like to move on to one of the vexing issues. It's kind of like a cloud over all of these political discussions. As noted by the late Professor Alam Habtu in his research for the Center for African Development Policy Research at Western Michigan University, in 1991, Ethiopia established an ethnic federal system that gave full recognition to ethnic autonomy while maintaining the unity of the state. Normally, those are two tensions that are difficult to resolve. We found that in Yugoslavia. We've found that in Iraq, and so many countries. The new Ethiopian constitution, though, perhaps for expedient reasons, created a federal system largely consisting of ethnic-based territorial units. The constitution aspires to achieve ethnic autonomy and equality while maintaining the Ethiopian federal state. The Ethiopian federal system is significant in that the Ethiopian constitution provides for the cessation of any ethnic unit. It encourages political parties to organize along ethnic lines and champions a federal state with a secession option. I can only imagine if that was in the US Constitution, what the consequences would have been. There is agreement among some Ethiopians and Westerners that Ethiopia's ethnic federalism has increased ethnic conflicts in Ethiopia. According to Professor Mahmoud Mamdani, who is a distinguished professor at Columbia University, ethnic federalism unleashed a struggle for supremacy among the big three, the Tigray, the Amhara, and the Oromo. Professor Mamdani states that the reforms being pushed by Prime Minister Abiy are clashing with Ethiopia's flawed constitution and could push the country toward an inter-ethnic conflict. Professor Mamdani concludes by stating that Prime Minister Abiy can achieve real progress if Ethiopia embraces a different kind of federation that is territorial and not ethnic. So I want to ask you to address this question. Are the opponents of the current Ethiopian constitution and ethnic federal system correct in their conclusion that the ethnic federal system has resulted in increased tribal conflict in Ethiopia? And obviously, we want to know where your party stands because you're representing your party as it applies to the Ethiopian constitution and the federal system that we have now. And is there any consideration of secession as a result of the consequences of the upcoming election? So let's turn first to Mr. Aadan, and then we'll turn to Dr. Gudina this time.
Thank you.
Aadan?
Yes, thanks again. In short, I say no. I say no, they're not correct. The single most dangerous thing that can happen in Ethiopia today is to abandon ethnic federalism and drop the constitutions. If this approach had any home, Ethiopia would have had democracy long ago. I say this because Ethiopia has been ruled many governments, central governments, I should say, and none of those governments achieved democracy in the past through central government. It was the TPLF in 1991 that led the first decentralized government, even though they had their own challenges and issues that they caused. But again, in short, that is not correct. The problem in Ethiopia is that the constitution was not taken seriously and the rights under the constitution were denied completely. The right to self-determination existed on paper only, not in practical. This is, again, a flaw assertion loaded with a special interest from certain quarters. The center has always dominated and marginalized the rest. After a bloody struggle, the nations achieved a measure of self-rule. In theory, TPLF mishandled ethnic federalism. If a driver throws the best car over the bridge due to carelessness, will you blame the car or the driver? TPLF drove multinational ethnic federalism in a way that gave them total domination of all resources in Ethiopia. In order to do that, they had to create stooge entities and use inhuman practices in order to control those entities. The federal structure or constitutions are as good as they are put into practice. The current massacre and ethnic violence are beyond ethnic federalism issues. They are more related to historic injustice and grievances that were never addressed, and deviant groups that want to gain control through encouraging ethnic violence. It happens everywhere. You can see it in Burma, India, even in some major developed democracies where nationalism is used to incite violence in order to win elections. So my point here is ethnic federalism was never an issue. It's only that the government that never put that into practical. So there was always a regime in power, saying ethnic federalism on papers, but not truly practicing. If Ethiopia was given a chance to truly practice ethnic federalism, I think it would have prospered and be at better position than it is today. And I advise the current administration, Dr. Abiy, to truly look into that and address this concern, because we have seen Ethiopia has tested the flavor of central government, where only the power was dominated by the regime at that moment. Then later in 1991, they've seen the TPLF just in words or in paper putting, stating that there will be a decentralized government, a self-ruled government, and federal government, but all those were just not impractical. It was just fiction, not functioning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ibrahim Aadan. I keep pronouncing that name so that people will remember the name instead of what's on your picture. Let me just throw something out just to be a little provocative here and give you a couple moments more to address the question, Dr. Godina. I was recently reading a very comprehensive study that was done to address the question of why is Northern Europe so much more economically prosperous than Africa? Why is North America so much advanced beyond South America? A lot of theories have been put up. In the United States, we're wrestling with white nationalism and so on. And the conclusion of this research was that in Northern Europe, there was the intermarriage of different tribes. And it was that mixture, if you will, of different religious viewpoints, different cultures, different views of the world that led to the kind of social integration that resulted in a much more aggressive economic expansion, and you know, the principles of the Enlightenment and so on. And they applied it to the United States, North America, and they said that the same thing is applying in the United States, because the United States is an amalgam. It's a nation of immigrants. Unfortunately, we suppressed, repressed, and really committed almost ethnic genocide against Native Americans, the so-called Indians. But it is that integration that is ultimately going to be our mainstay in terms of the social and economic stability. I'm just sharing that, and of course I'm paraphrasing the results of the study, but it's interesting because Ethiopia is trying something different to enable the various ethnic groups to be able to have their own autonomy, but also contribute to a federalist state. So, Dr. Godina, if you would share your insight into the Ethiopian experiment in democracy here, and whether you think it's in the right direction, what your party is going to do as a consequence of whatever the electoral results are coming up, et cetera. So, Dr. Godina. You're on mute, though. We really want to hear you, Dr. Godina, and you're on mute. Far better that I go on mute. And then there we go. Okay, very good.
Okay. You know, but starting from a more general one, you know, a person called Ali Mazuri, he's not a Kenyan known, a very known political scientist. He was saying how Japan was able to westernize without giving up her culture, and how Africa failed to do that. And in many ways, I think that is the problems of underdevelopment takes a long, and I don't have to indulge in that. You know, the question of secession, from the beginning, we say no. The question of autonomy, without real autonomy in Ethiopia, as a really what Ethiopia's future could be, to be really to sum up, Yugoslavia's future, really Yugoslavia's future. It is because of the Serb nationalism that Yugoslavia was destroyed. I think some of the people in Ethiopia who are saying that, well, ethnic nationalism, doing that and doing this, I think we understand the problem of ethnic nationalism, especially the problem is the problem of domination. What the structure of the EPRF tried is really, without democratizing it, it simply creates the structure, uses that structure for its own monopoly of power. But in the, ethnic nationalism, the problem of ethnicity or nationalism, the problem of marginalization, especially the problem of historical marginalization, as a Somali friend, our Somali colleague has been saying, it is historical. The formation of the Ethiopian state. The Ethiopian state was created on an equal basis. There were privileged classes and groups who used Ethiopia for centuries, to benefit, to whatever, all kinds of things. In fact, if you read, it's a very good book written by a Greek professor called John Markakis, who has been writing on Ethiopia since the days of the emperor. He was saying, in fact, he said to give that book, pass that book to the present prime minister. I think I sent to him. I hope, I don't know whether he read it, but I passed to him. He said in that book, Ethiopia, the last two frontiers, he was summing up a real historic, giving a real historical summary that one,